February 1st, 1968. Big old storm hits Memphis, Tennessee. And the sanitation workers who were working that day, all of them were black at that time, so bad had to take shelter. But there really wasn't anywhere they could go. White hotels, of course, wouldn't let them in. They had what they called colored cabins. So a few of them decided to take shelter in those cabins, which were so small that two of the members weren't able to fit inside the cabin at the time. So where did they sleep? They decided to go in the back of their truck, and they slept among the trash and the garbage. Overnight, the truck malfunctioned, and two men, Eckel Cole, Robert Walker, were crushed to death. Justifiably outraged, the sanitation workers called for a strike, using the phrase, "I am a man." And of course the strike failed. About a month later, though, civil rights leader well known to us today, James Lawson, decided to call up his buddy, a guy we also know, Martin Luther King Jr. He says, "You have to get to Memphis and you have to help stand in solidarity with these sanitation workers. We could really use you in Memphis." And despite some kind of pushback from his inner circle, Martin Luther King pulled away from the Poor People's Campaign at the time, and he went to join his friends and family and siblings in Memphis, Tennessee, to stand in solidarity with those sanitation workers. A week later, as he was walking out of his room on the balcony of room 306 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, Martin Luther King was shot and died. And he was preparing a sermon to preach that week entitled, "Why America May Go to Hell." Each year, we gather as a nation, as a community, at least we'd like to think, to remember and celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. And people on both sides of the fence, so to speak, love to gloat and claim Dr. King. They'll quote him. They'll speak so highly of him, and it just makes me wonder sometimes whether or not we're actually talking about the same person. I mean, really. I've noticed most folk who talk and claim Martin Luther King are deeply sanitizing him, often in kind of these risk-averse ways, and they have zero interest, zero intention on actually doing anything that he either said or anything that he did or what he was about. They claim him, and by doing so, they tame him. They declaw him of his prophetic intent. Not only was this guy shot, he was, throughout his life, stabbed in the chest. His house was bombed. There were innumerable threats to his life, to his family, to his health. He was considered an extremist, rabble-rouser, troublemaker. And despite all this, he worked 20 hours a day on average. You know how many speeches he gave a year? 450 speeches a year he would give. There's more speeches than there are in a year. There are days in a year. I have trouble enough just every month getting up there, man. 450. I can't imagine. When they did his autopsy, he died at 39. They said his organs looked as though he was about in his 60s. leads the Montgomery bus boycott at 26 years old. 26. You want to talk about burning the candle at both ends. When most of us think of Martin Luther King, we think of civil rights, and we absolutely should. But his life and his legacy and what he was about even then was so much more than just what he's being remembered for this weekend. Let me show you what I mean. The guiding principle of his life and ministry and thought was that political equality should equal social equality, which should equal spiritual equality. And honestly, like when I think about it, Martin Luther King could be one of the most significant religious, if not just all-out moral figures of the last 2 centuries. And that of course, there was other people that contributed to everything that he was about. But the America that we have before Martin Luther King and the America that we have after Martin Luther King, we're still going through many of the same things, yes, but it looks so different. It looks so different. Just for example, tomorrow is the college football national championship. Anybody actually interested in that? It's a big thing in the rest of the country. So Indiana Hoosiers versus the Miami Hurricanes. There we go, Nancy. Yep. It's a big game, but can you imagine this event without any black or brown student athletes? Can you imagine any NCAA program these days without black or brown or minority athletes? Can you imagine any professional teams on that note? Can you imagine the Olympics that are coming up, the Super Bowl? His life and legacy touched so many areas and so many other lives after him, and it wasn't just in the area of civil rights. Without Martin Luther King, we would have no women's rights, women's voting. Without Martin Luther King, we would have no bilingual voting. Without Martin Luther King, we would have no Disabilities Act. We'd have no LGBTQ rights. He set the stage for so many people who came after him. And it extended far beyond just that vote. And that's what he was after, I think. Something like that. He reconstituted, and I use that word very intentionally, reconstituted, restructured American democracy and American identity. He was aiming at something that he called the beloved community. And we hear that tossed around a lot with his name. Beloved community. His vision of a world where one's flourishing doesn't depend on somebody else's suffering. And here's the part that makes all this so uncomfortable. Because if he really did reconstitute American democracy, if he really did crack open who counts, who gets to belong, who gets to speak, who gets to vote, who gets to love, that backlash was never going to end in 1968, as we see today. Whenever democracy widens, historically speaking, someone else always feels like it's being stripped from them. That it's being taken from them. And that's why Martin Luther King wasn't just about racism. He talked about economic anxiety. He talked about classes. He talked about militarism. He talked about the way that fear gets weaponized by those in power. He knew that the real enemy of this beloved community was not just disagreement. It was the belief that my safety depends on your exclusion. And that belief did not just die with segregation. As a matter of fact, it just learned to speak a little bit of a new language. It learned to speak in bumper stickers. It learned to speak in Fox News. It learned to speak in social media. It learned to speak in Christian values. It learned to speak in law and order. It learned to speak in mass incarceration, mass deportation. It learned to speak in making America great again. Just learned new language. And so if we really want to honor King this weekend, if we really want to do justice to the life and ministry of Martin Luther King, we cannot just ask or honor what he did back then. Because there are so many other things on our doorstep today that demand we do something similar. That's how we honor King. We all know people in our lives that are very, shall we say, difficult to relate to, maintain a relationship with, based on whatever political party they support, whatever they support that's going on in the world right now. And hear me out, it's important to listen. It's important to listen to them. Because they need a different perspective on a lot of things. They need your perspective. They need your experience. They need your story. And I think they're still a part of this beloved community. Call me crazy. They are human. They have families. They love, they bleed just like the rest of us. And still, listening alone, not going to cut it. Listening alone is not enough. Because that tension between listening and respecting and challenging and resisting sits at the absolute core of the beloved community that Dr. King was talking about. Adam Clark is a black theologian, spent years studying King and the civil rights movement, and he puts it this way: beloved community is not just about race, it's about race, economics, and militarism. Three things, he says, three systems that prevent us all from being neighbors. See, beloved community is not just about proximity. It's about how we relate to each other within that proximity. And King was driven by a vision of neighborliness, where human life is formed out of nurture and care and mutual responsibility, not just shared space. Just because a school is desegregated doesn't make it not racist anymore. It goes beyond that. And it goes for the same today. A community is not just a group of people with overlapping interests. A community is a relational interdependence. It's a way of being bound to each other's fate. That's why he could say things like this: we are caught in this inescapable network of mutuality. We are tied in a single garment of destiny. That's more than poetry. That's reality. And beneath all the antagonisms, all the news cycles today, all the shouting, all the violence, there is what a major hero of mine and a personal friend of Dr. King, actually, a guy named Thomas Merton. Beneath all this is what he called the hidden wholeness, a hidden ground of love that ties us all together, a spiritual interrelatedness that still holds everyone together even when we want to deny it or we wish it weren't so. Beloved community asks us to live as though that hidden wholeness is true, even when everything around us tries to convince us it is not. And that takes more than listening, my friends. That takes more than listening. That takes courage. That takes, dare I say, the Spirit of God. And this is where King becomes dangerous. He didn't just call us to be kind. He called us to restructure the world. He said the moral arc of the universe is long, right? But it bends towards justice. That also requires individuals to bend with it. He knew that neighborliness was not just about evolution, but it was also about a little bit of coercion, because it takes both transformed hearts and transforms systems to do this work. You need people to change, and you need policies to make justice possible. This is why beloved community is not just built by defeating our enemies. It's built by creating new relationships after the battle. He goes on to say this: the aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. A new relationship, he says, comes into being between the oppressed and the oppressor. And that's what makes this so terrifying to systems of domination that we are under, like today. Because it doesn't just settle for victory. It demands change. It demands transformation. As we read in our scripture today, when the Apostle Paul tells the Corinthian church that they're one body, he's not just offering a warm little metaphor there. He's confronting a divided, status-obsessed community, saying something very dangerous. He's responding to a church that is structured and fractured by class, by spiritual elitism, by a social hierarchy, a people who deciding who matters and who doesn't. He's directly confronting those people. Sound familiar? The Corinthian church looked a lot like America does today. You had wealthy patrons, you had poor laborers, you had insiders, you had outsiders, you had people that believed that their own gifts made them superior to others within the community. And apparently, there was one guy that decided to marry his mother-in-law. That's a true story, by the way, right there in the Bible. Paul was responding to all that. Paul's metaphor is anti-hierarchy. When he says the parts of the body that seem weaker are indispensable, he's not just being poetic, he's overturning a social order. He's saying the people you want to ignore are actually the people who are holding you up. That's beloved community. The weakest parts that you call weak anyways are indispensable. The ones you try to hide are holy. Paul said if one member suffers, all suffer. Just like King said, we are caught in this inescapable network of mutuality. It's the same truth, it's the same gospel, except one preached in house churches, one preached in Baptist churches, but they both took them to the streets. Both are telling us you cannot break someone else without breaking yourself. And you cannot heal the world without staying somehow connected to the ones that are trying to break it. Can't call yourself the head while you crush your legs. A body that becomes uniform will die. Life requires difference, friction, vulnerability, and we all need one another, even if we'd like to assume that some of our neighbors are a part of the body called the appendix that we can just safely remove when it's about to burst. That'd be convenient. But the varieties of nationalism that we are encountering today are bound up in a theology of syncretization and purity and forced alignment. And that's opposite of what Paul and Jesus and King were up to. Theirs was a theology of communion. And beloved community is its public form. That's a tension. That's a tension that I wish I could resolve, if I'm being honest with you. But unfortunately, I don't get to resolve it. We're called to recognize the full humanity of those who participate in systems of harm, even as we are called to resist those people and those systems with everything within us, and minister to those that they are hurting. That's not a contradiction. That's the cost of what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the cost of discipleship. That is the cost of love in a broken world. King never confused that love with approval, though. Never confuse that love with approval. Never confuse neighborliness with neutrality. To love your enemy is not to let your enemy keep hurting people. It is to refuse their hatred, refuse to let that hatred have the final word, and refuse to let that hatred make you someone else that you aren't. Beloved community means we fight for justice without surrendering to disposability. Not even for those who are doing the harming. We do not deny the humanity of oppressors, but we do deny their right to actually inflict that oppression and that domination on our friends that we encounter every day and our family. This is why the work of love is so freaking exhausting. We can listen all we want. We can stay safe in a relationship when it is safe. We can offer curiosity. We can offer care. And at the same time, we have to organize. We have to protest. We have to vote. We have to disrupt. We have to demand laws that protect the vulnerable. We have to demand spaces like this one that protect the vulnerable, where everyone is actually welcome. That is how we bend history towards justice. We have to bend history towards justice without breaking our own souls. It's hard work. I want to close here with 3 questions that I think belong in our hearts. Not just this weekend, but moving forward into whatever surprises or whatever fresh hell, as Steve Pocock likes to say, 2026 is bringing us this year. What kind of neighbor is God calling you to become? What habits, courage, or compassion is it going to take for you to actually live into that? And what fears or attachments are standing in your way? Beloved community, my friends, is not waiting for us in the future. It's calling us into the present. We won't get it perfect. We won't. And the people we encounter on a daily basis, they sure as hell won't get it perfect either. We know this. But won't you join us in trying? Because someday this is all going to be over. Because someday, this day, we shall overcome.